are illegal aliens? 75%?
75%
In
of
California. In California?
In California.
In California.
Well,
Does that sound right? That sounds like a lot of... No, this comes from the LA Times, as printed by We the People News. And We the People News sounds like it's got to be accurate. Yes, dear. We can all sit pretty close to the front if you'd like, because
of the runner.
if you don't, there'll be complaints from somebody.
You gotta put those red shoes on. You need a second row.
Hey, that's my mistake.
We like the socks too.
I'm sorry?
We like the socks too.
Oh, you, thank you.
He should have the red shoes on with the right socks.
He's looking like,
Oh, I can't see them on the camera.
You want me to go back further?
That's much
Is
better.
that better?
There's the song.
It's going to be very casual.
Blue and white socks.
what have you been looking down at my feet for? Keep your eyes off my feet. Keep your eyes on the prize.
I would start the meeting now, but I'm having some competition from someone. There seems to be.
Can't everybody move up a little bit?
She's talking to the crowd, that's true.
Oh, well, they don't want to move something. That's all right, it's an exercise class, it's spider wound.
Well, we wait a few minutes for other people to show up. One of the things we talked about a couple weeks ago, can you hear? Is this working? Was the possibility of having future meetings, or some of our meetings in the future, address the candidacies for state office. And by that, candidacies and candidates who are running for office here in Florida. And in order to do that, what we need to do is some research. Sadly, Carol Lee isn't here, but she did a great deal of, I thought, good work a year and a half ago, looking at the cabinet appointees of the new government, of Biden's government. A similar kind of work could be done here. And I wonder, does anybody, by show of hands, know of any of the candidates for state office? Well, among other things, that may either prove that there's no interest in it whatsoever, or that we need it may be something to learn about. By show of hands, are we interested in learning more about who the candidates are? Okay, let's try. Now, since I'd rather not be doing the only research on it, because I'm confident it'll be biased one way or the other, who's willing to, what do we have? State representatives and state senators? I guess they're both. And are there both houses in the state of Florida? A Senate and a House? I don't know. Boy. I think the answer is yes, okay. And that means from our area, there'll be presumably at least a senator and a representative, possibly more of one or the other. And times two, because there'll be an election. So we need anybody to volunteer, somebody to volunteer. Well, not everyone.
Let's wait and see if Carol Lee shows up.
Thanks, Ken. Ken Gorman has offered to do research. Let's do, I want 4. So that's 1. Doug?
I'll work with Ken.
Okay, that's 2. And to make this a joint effort, Sue, would you be interested in researching one of the candidates? And Sarah, how about you? That's the long and the short of the women's side. Very good.
She's asking, it's just for the state.
Yeah, just for the state. We're talking about state representatives and state senators who from our area. Now, next week, we're going to hear,
Because we don't know what they're doing with that stupid fifth district.
I'm sorry, I can't hear. And our microphone runner is talking to somebody. Sal, Sue's trying to say something.
All right. Ken, can you get Sue just a minute?
Again?
I'm talking.
I'm sorry, Sue.
Is Cindy running again? That's not working. Is Cindy running again?
Shackelford?
Stevenson.
Cindy.
Is she running again?
Is she running again? I don't know. Point is, we're going to see her next week, right?
I know.
And that will make it easy if she's running again, because we'll know. But also, we can ask her who the other candidates are. So let's not worry about names yet, but next week, let's specifically focus on addressing the questions. Explaining her what we're going to do. And
Well, there are
see-
very few representatives for,
I would assume there's 2 representatives in
For
one
this area.
Senate, but I don't know.
you don't want to do federal?
Well, because sure. When's the next federal election?
November.
Will there be somebody running in
There's a
November
primary.
22
There's a primary, probably in August.
with federal officers
Federal office.
You've got federal representatives and
every 2 years? Exactly.
you've got Val Demings,
Absolutely. Let's do
you've got
that.
Val Demings running against Rubio for Senate.
And who's the Republican running against Rubio?
She's a Democrat.
Who's the Democrat running against
The
Rubio?
only one primary? I don't know who's running.
Okay, let's do the House seats too. And if there's a Senate seat, Rubio's up for grabs. Do that
Val
as well.
Demings is a Democrat.
Okay, so there'll be lots of names. Sarah, did you agree, or I've agreed for you?
Oh, that's fine, yeah, sure, I'll do it.
Okay, we need to find probably 3 or 4 for women and 3 or 4 men.
3 or 4.
Sorry.
Well, we're talking about state jobs, Senate, state jobs, House,
But the House
federal House, and at least federal Senate.
Okay, yeah, we'll figure it out.
our district for state.
She says it's only
It's
district.
only our district for state.
Carol Lee is coming.
1 or 2 candidates.
She's coming?
Here's Caroline.
Oh, Carolee!
You say only our district for the state office?
What? You don't know how you've been featured.
Oh, is that
Oh
right?
my gosh, you're so up in front. You've been heavily featured.
Oh, I don't want to.
I don't care who we
Because-
elect in Miami.
Because, tell Carolee,
What you volunteered for.
Caroline, we volunteered you to help join with Sarah, who's going to help you, Ken and Doug, to come up with a way to research and then discuss candidates for office this coming fall, both federal and state. And in your discussion, you can decide on more or fewer officers. I mean, there may be important people running for office we want to follow, and less important. Does that make any sense?
I don't get it.
I'm sorry?
I don't get it. The state, we only vote for those in this district. I don't care who they elect in
I
Miami.
thought this was about next week.
It's very limited.
No. Next week, we're going to have Cindy speak. It seems to me, just a thought, that it may be interesting to know more about candidates we might vote for sure, but also about candidates that are important in the state. Not much interest.
not much
Okay.
interest in Miami, they're saying.
So no, let's not do it. Let's just, who are the people we are going to vote for?
It's only
And
this
who's
district.
going to do this?
This district,
This district, right.
period.
In this district, or what if it's in Duval County and we're in St. John's?
We don't vote for them.
That's right.
If
St.
we vote
John's
for
coming.
them, that's fine.
Okay, let's make the rule only for people we can vote for,
Yeah.
which means St. John's County, and I guess there's a House district that must be,
That's Cindy
Well,
or
that's
she's.
Jeremiah Blocker is our representative.
and who will be running against him or her, Kim?
That's states, that's
Jeremiah
federal.
Blocker is our county commissioner.
County Commissioner. I'm talking about representative to Congress. Who's the,
Congress is
The
Rutherford,
John Rutherford?
Rutherford's our federal.
is our representative.
So we have Rutherford and whoever runs against him in November.
If he's opposed, he's a Republican, I think. If he's opposed, he's
They're all Republicans.
Yeah, I think everybody that's elected or that's in office is Republican.
Okay. Yeah, Rutherford is our representative.
But the whole idea of asking for you and Sarah and Sue to do it together is so that you can talk about who we should learn more about. But I think it's going to be just the representatives we run against, that we will have a chance of voting
Cindy,
for.
who's coming next week, is our representative to the state legislature.
This is something they'll take
Right,
over the course of the next
for
couple of
elections.
months, yeah.
Election,
And we'll meet Cindy next week. She is the state rep,
yes.
right? And you and Sue know her, or just you?
You went,
You know her well?
I knew her well.
Who invited her to come?
I did.
Yeah, good. You know her well enough that she'd come here.
I knew her well. I haven't known her, in past years, haven't.
Okay, excellent. So we got a plan.
Yeah. We have another state representative too.
Who's that?
I think his name is Hudson, and he's in a lot of controversy right now, because he's a developer as well. But he's the senator, our state senator. I think everybody should know these things, you know.
That's the idea.
Well informed. Nobody's interested.
I know, but this is where we can make a difference.
For those of you who didn't hear,
You know,
Carol Lee is saying that one of our representatives is a developer.
right. And he's trying to develop a lot of houses, like 10,000 or something.
There's been a lot of controversy. I think his name is Travis Hudson, and he's our state senator. And I don't know if you all know the program Save Guana. Have you heard about Save Guana at all? And have you contributed to it?
I couldn't hear the word state.
We have a representative who was elected to a committee. I'm trying to remember her name, Nicole somebody. And he eliminated that committee so that he got rid of her. And she was our elected representative to a particular committee. And Travis Hudson is trying to develop, I think, like 10,000 homes in the northwest section. So there's been a bit of controversy. There's a lot going on in the state. And I'm hoping Cindy Stevenson next week will talk to us about what's going on. I don't know how free she is to talk about Governor DeSantis, but he's certainly been in the news lately with a couple of programs that he's promoting in order to run for president.
Okay, well, so we'll defer the discussion of the candidates until we have their names, something about them, and in some instances, even an invitation to them, okay?
We should also have Jeremiah Blocker here. He's our county commissioner, and there are things going on in the county.
Sure.
that we can make a
That'd be
difference.
good, great idea.
We're a
Will he
good.
be running for office? Will it be running again in November?
Okay. Well,
Well, we'll find out more. We'll be the most informed group of people who have no interest whatsoever in these people around. But I must say, I'm reminded of a little story, if I may bore you with a story about developers. And I was a developer in my past too, so it applies to me. A priest was trying to organize some function at his church for which he needed people who were virgins, who had not been involved with anybody before. And so he said, come to my office, and am I getting the story right, Sal, or not? I'm not getting it right?
Come on, Sally, come on. We need a chair next to us. I just have a feeling that you're not.
Okay, I'll defer it until I can remember the damn joke. I thought this morning what we do is just I'll put it first to you. And let's just talk a little bit about what are the news, what are the current events today? What are the news stories of greatest interest? Don?
Wednesday night, there was a program on PBS, the title of which was Climate Crisis, The Facts. And I don't know how many people watched it, but I suggest that you do, because if you can, I presume it will be shown again, but it's really in-depth examination of what has been occurring and where we stand now and what's the problems ahead of us. And it's scary. You've got to do things in the next 10 or 15 years that will affect this planet forever, for a long, long time ahead. Because what they're saying is in the next, by 2070, this planet will be unable to feed its population.
2070.
2070. Which means our grandchildren are going to have a problem, a big problem. If our is true.
Great.
That's good.
Well, you get two Dons for the price of one. Don was talking of climate change.
Yeah.
PBS also has had 2 sessions already on the role of big oil and big management, the Koch brothers, etc., and Exxon Mobil, as far as climate change, and as deniers, and which held us back some 3 or 4 decades, because they convinced the American people that there really was no climate problem.
That's interesting. I wonder if there's a way for us to get to shows like that other than when they're being broadcast.
I don't know.
Probably
Well,
on
they do repeat them, and they have them on their extended program, PBS. You'd have to, the only thing is you have to be a member, or you have to contribute so much a year. Very minimal.
I think it's worth doing, because I'd like to see both of them, but I'm also interested in maybe figuring out a way to show all or parts of those shows here at a meeting. Add a little bit more to that, either one of you, on what particularly alarmed you in the discussions. What events or actions we're taking are leading to such a disastrous climate future.
Well, the primary problem is we're doing nothing, or have been doing nothing. We're starting to get things going, but science has been telling this for 25 or 30 years, and if we had started then, the problems that we're running into now would not be serious, because you would have eased into changing the power industries and so forth. But the situation is such that how do you want to put it? That the people that have to deal with this are politicians. And they're not listening to the scientists because the scientists are telling them things they don't want to hear.
Exactly.
And most of their people that they represent don't want to hear. But it's here, it's coming. And for example, they point out that even right now, tomatoes are becoming more difficult to find. And the supply of them is going to go down over a period of time to virtually zero. Because of where and they showed pictures of places, tomato farms that are big, and they don't have enough water to run.
So water supply is the
This
shortage.
particular case is the problem. Another one is palm oil, which I know nothing about, but apparently it's in everything under the sun. And it comes from Indonesia and Ceylon, whatever. But same problem. It's disappeared. And the products that they are involved with are struggling, trying to find some substitute, because they don't have this palm oil anymore. And this kind of thing is going to grow as climates change, and areas that have historically had good growing conditions will not, because of lack of rain, or in some cases, too much. And flooding is going to happen. Like in the upper Midwest is going to have some similar problems of the wheat production because of if these rains that they're getting continue and so forth. But it's an extremely interesting program.
Well, it does sound interesting. It's something I'd like to figure out a way for us to watch. We'll do that. You know, I was thinking about that, watching the news, the incessant news about Ukraine. Apparently, Ukraine's share of world wheat production is really high. And for countries in Africa, it's approaching 75 to 80% of their grains come from Ukraine or that part of Russia close to Ukraine. Add that to whatever climate degradation in grain production is occurring, particularly in the near future, that could be a real crisis. And they're countries least capable of enduring or sustaining themselves during a crisis period. I wonder, you know, what can be done about something like that? We hear it on the news, but what is possible? What are the steps that can be taken to alleviate the damage being done by climate change or failure to address climate change?
Elect people who care.
I'm sorry?
Elect people who care. I mean, you had a previous governor who did not forbid the use of the words climate crisis.
You're not being recorded, A, and B, I can't hear it very well.
Elect people who care. You had a previous governor who forbid the use of the term climate crisis or global warming. And you had a former president who thought it was all phooey. So, I mean, what are you going to do?
Bill?
Well, we have an administration today, what are they doing about it? I don't see anything happening there either.
Yeah.
So, you know, I don't, you know, when we get into politics here, of course, that's the problem. Exactly. And there needs to be some kind of a way for people to really understand this and get together on it instead of fighting about it. Because I think one of the problems, at least from the liberal side or the so-called progressives, is that they are forcing things that, you know, stop any kind of oil drilling or anything else now and that sort of thing, rather than have some sort of a program where if they could agree on it, that we do this, you know, on a basis that we can actually deal with, rather than just stop all this other stuff that is not going to solve it. At least people can't deal with it. That's the problem.
Yeah, that's
Don again, and then Doug. First, let's do Doug since you've had the microphone.
Well, first, for the sake of my comments here, I'm going to assume that the climate change situation is real, just for the sake of my comments. If it is real, we should be working to manage the transition. And as we manage the transition, what are some of the options? One of the options would be nuclear on that transition. Another option could be natural gas in lieu of other hydrocarbons. Also, let's say we look at the electrification of vehicles, which is real big today. Here's an interesting fact about, just take one Tesla. One Tesla for the battery, for one Tesla, for the rare metals that are required for that battery, requires 250 tons of ore. So it gives you the idea of the magnitude. In addition, these rare earths, probably 75% or plus of them, come from China. So I think that if we're trying to get someplace, and as I say, let's assume that the climate change is real. I'm not, for the sake of my comments here. There should be a transition plan that has the interim options and also some timing. And I'm inclined to believe that if that was done, we would find that we are going to need our existing hydrocarbons for a period of time, which would be contradictory to just trying to, if you will, shut them down to the extent we can. So it bothers me that to the extent that climate change may be real, the process is being proposed by people that are of low implementation mentality.
Don?
Very good.
Well, Doug, I agree with you, but the point is, the things that you're talking about should have been done 20 or 25 years ago.
No, but they weren't.
And now it's backed up into a problem that has to be dealt with much more rapidly, much more expensively. And so how do we do it? And you're right, you need a program, and you got two groups of people, particularly in Washington, who some want to do something and other people don't want to do anything. And there's maybe some in the middle too. But trying to get a group of people in the political world to sit down and set up something like this is an extremely difficult situation.
Carol Lee?
What about solar and wind? Here we live in a climate where solar could be so wonderful for everybody.
Doug, you want to
What's
answer
wrong
that?
with that? Why isn't that a consideration?
Solar and wind are viable options irrespective of climate change. Those are both good. They're both intermittent sources of energy. So in order to, you have to have some other source of energy in conjunction with solar and wind. Now, A on that list would be batteries. If you have some sort of essentially stored energy system, but in the case of, let's take solar as an example. As we have moved somewhat towards solar, the technology has become more efficient. So in all of these areas, we're looking for technology breakthroughs that we don't have today. You look at the history of solar, that has occurred. There has been significant technology progress. In the case of batteries, unfortunately, the efficiency seems to have been bottomed out at this point with the price of the rare metals going up, so that the batteries are not becoming more efficient economically. But I have no objection at all to solar and wind. That's where it's available. It's just like going back a generation hydropower. That was a no-brainer, but that was back in the 30s when basically in the United States, most of our hydroelectric dams were being built.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
We have a nuclear
Go ahead, Phoebe.
plant in
Let's wait for a
Idaho,
mic.
middle of Idaho, we have a nuclear plant that's not.
Hang on, hold every word.
Okay. In Idaho, about maybe 45 minutes from Sun Valley, Idaho, where we go, there's a nuclear power plant, and they're restarting it now. So there you are, some nuclear power going to be in.
What's interesting, though, as you look at this, the mix, I don't know how many of you have focused on this issue for a long time, but if you think about in our lifetimes, the mix of generation sources, the mix between coal, the largest, oil, natural gas, hydro, wind, solar, the mix hasn't changed that much. It seems to me, anyway, that the source of power is changing somewhat. That is to say, within the mix. Oil, for example, has gone down to virtually nothing in electricity generation. Natural gas is going up. Coal is very slowly going down as a percentage of the source of electricity. Wind and hydro are going up very, very slowly. And part of the reason is because the demand is increasing faster than the total supply, if that makes any sense. Doug?
I'm going to disagree with one of your points here. I think one possible future source, a very significant source of energy, is hydrogen. And the missing link there is how to economically separate hydrogen from oxygen in H2O. Now you can do it with a nuclear catalyst, but I think they're working on some other technologies. But if they get that technology done, where we can get hydrogen out of water, that'll be a breakthrough.
But how long have we been working on hydrogen as a source? I agree with you completely. And I remember a great movie, it's probably 20 years old, when somebody came up with a solution to how to get hydrogen out of water. It made a good movie. They didn't make any hydrogen power out of it. Doug?
Well, this goes back probably 35 years. I have seen water run a Class 8 tractor, and that is successfully separating the hydrogen from the oxygen in water. Unfortunately, the way it was done was a nuclear catalyst. And as we were looking at it, decided that people would not take to a nuclear catalyst sitting next to them at a traffic
I
light.
was going to say, makes for a crowded tractor seat to have it next to the thing. The question, what are the implications of this change, or the failure to change that mix of sources? If in the process of generating power for our country, we have to burn coal, and coal is slowly but surely destroying the environment. What's the alternative? I mean, we've been talking about shifting away from coal, certainly all of my adult life, and I was in the pollution business, both coal and then power. We talked about wind and solar, and as I think I've said here before, it was always my position, we're not going to go for the cleanest source of electricity. In poor countries particularly, we're going for the cheapest. Cheap always meant coal. And that meant new coal plants, not fewer coal plants, in areas where most electricity demand is growing. And if I had it to do over again, I'm going to tell you, the idea of showing up in some poor country in Africa particularly and saying we're going to make power here using solar and wind, and oh, by the way, a kilowatt hour is going to cost 25 cents. It doesn't make any sense at all, versus coal at 2 cents. Bill?
Something that we haven't discussed in this discussion is the rest of the world, who is doing more to pollute, like China, India, and these countries. And if you put those two countries together, obviously, whatever we do is, I mean, it's important, my point is, but that's the other problem we have, is to try to get these other countries to do what they should be doing to reduce emissions and all that kind of stuff. And I think that's always an argument sometime with other people saying, well, unless China does something,
Does that matter?
you know, and that's another big problem to try to address. The UN should be dealing with this. I don't know, they're very effective in the first place.
I was going to say,
It's not going to be that.
But to me, you think about the difficulty of addressing climate change and the kinds of decisions needed to really make a difference. And then you look at the decision-making body, and anything that has to be dealt with by our Congress, as soon as you say that, to me, you're saying it's not going to happen. You're basically a 50-50 Congress divided by, in both camps, a group of people who have secure seats and therefore don't have to run for any, don't have to be intelligent or have good ideas because they've got a secure seat. Ken?
A big deal was made about being in the Paris Accord. Does anyone know what success there's been, or what's happening with
On what?
the Paris Accord? That was for the countries in climate change.
Well, I couldn't agree more, but to sign or not to sign was the big issue. And of course, we decided to sign under Obama, then not to sign under Trump, and then to sign again under
Right, so we're back in.
But I kind of want to say, and so what? I don't know what whatever they've agreed to do, is it happening? And is it happening not just in those developing parts of the world, as Bill points out, but right here at home? What has been our shift away from coal percentage-wise? And I don't have the data right here, but I'll find it for next week. I'm going to tell you, it's precious little to shift away from, to increase wind and solar, decrease coal. In part because all increases go toward increase in demand.
One thought following on what Don said initially, is this lack of belief or lack of trust or lack of confidence in science. We're not listening to science anymore, we're listening to political arguments. And the same thing happened with COVID. I mean, we seem to have lost, as a country, any kind of confidence in whatever scientists say. Scientists say, you know, the Earth is falling apart. More people are moving to Miami than any other city in the United States. And we've heard for quite a number of years that Miami is falling into the sea. So what is the appeal about moving to a city that's falling into the sea? People are ignoring it. They're saying, well, scientists said that, but that's obviously not true. Because my state representative or my congressman or my senator says, forget all that stuff. It's all bull.
Jacques?
Yeah, I'd like to go back to hydrogen.
Very fast. Let me hold it for you.
Okay. And I think also, I'm the one also here who built it really in hydrogen. It's certainly not the only way out, but it's one. And I think that things are moving in that sense. I mean, it's a lot we talk about it, but 2 years ago, I wanted to buy a new Honda, and I discovered that there was a kind of Honda which fitted exactly what I wanted to do in different ways. And I discovered that this Honda was running on hydrogen. And I could not buy it because it was only accessible. You could only buy it in California. Why? It's because they had some posts where they could do the charging or whatever they do. They also do it for electricity. And I know that there is a train somewhere in Germany which has been running on an experimental way on hydrogen. And so a few days ago, I decided that that's the future, and I bought some stocks, 2 stocks in hydrogen. And I said, I didn't put money, I lost 10% already, but that's another thing. But when I was looking and studying the question, I discovered that there were a lot of companies which work on hydrogen. Car company in Germany and in France, they're already working and spending a lot of money there, and other small ones too. The problem for many of the companies is that they did not have enough funds. They needed more capital in order to activate the research, and the research needs to be done in order for what we already know scientifically to be used on a bigger sphere. And so again, it's going to be a political thing because you have to believe in it. If you want to vote for it, you have to believe in it. If in Washington or Paris or Berlin or you name it, you don't have people who are for it, are enough people, powerful people, it's not going to develop. There won't be money. That's all I say. But there is hope for hydrogen. That's my conclusion.
One of my beliefs has always been that in the private sector, in the for-profit sector, any good idea will eventually come out because there's profit in it. And while governments may or may not be doing research, somebody out there in the private sector, and it could easily be ExxonMobil, is doing a ton of research. If they could find a solution to readily make and distribute hydrogen, and it is as effective as we all believe it to be, they'd be crazy not to be the one to invent it and develop its production. And the fact that it doesn't exist means they don't have a solution to the simple problems of how to make it in quantity or distribute it in quantity. Does that make any sense? And in other words, it would be nice if maybe a public body, Congress or the UN or some public body did it. I'm confident that if it were possible, the private companies would be doing it. there must be something wrong with not wrong, just difficult in solving those problems of producing hydrogen or any other cheaper and more climate-friendly fuel. Doc?
I've got to go back to my experience of years ago. We came up with the idea, this is probably 34 years ago, of running trucks on natural gas.
Yeah.
And so we, at that point, the government was pushing methane. So we were outside the political preferred solution. We had, of course, the people were afraid that the tank was going to explode. In order to get the natural gas to run our test, we actually got it from Southern California Edison. Now we're in Akron, Ohio. And we got the natural gas. Of course, people say, well, you're not going to have natural gas stations all around. Of course, we said, well, all these trucks come back to the terminal every day.
Yeah.
So anyway, we ran the test. It was successful, but there was so much from a political standpoint. We were out of phase with the consensus that methane was the way to go. So it never went anywhere. But it worked.
Did it work financially? Was it cost effective?
It would have been cost effective, but it was as far as, well, the answer is not if we have to get the gas from Southern California Edison. No, it would not be cost effective. But of course, you have to get all kinds of permits to put the tank in, all that. So,
Don?
Just to tie it all together kind of way, what you're saying about the political and economic conditions and problems that are involved with it, the thing, it is happening. This climate change is happening. And it has to be dealt with, and if it's not dealt with, then the catastrophe, or the ultimate effects on society are going to be
that's mine.
going to be extremely. Oh,
Sorry. Thank you.
is there anything else we can find on the floor there? No, but that's if you was like say kind of the final point. With all the things that have been said about the problems and both economically and politically to do these things are true. There's no question, but they've got to be done. That's the point. It's just somehow it's got to be done. Be done with.
On the climate change side of the equation, there's no debate between two political parties. It's just happening. And as it happens, what's interesting is much of what's actually happening now is what we were forecasting 30 years ago. And while it was happening, our response to it, nothing. And it's sort of, when we were talking about it, it was important. When we stopped talking about it, it was still important. We just weren't talking about it.
So,
Ken? First Ken.
This started with Don talking about by 2070 we wouldn't be able to feed the population. Well, just in regard to wheat in Ukraine, you mentioned it before. If the Russians capture Odessa, they're going to control the Black Sea. That's how Ukraine ships to Africa. And you just said, I think it's 40% of the wheat comes from Ukraine and Russia. That's a red line for us to think that although we can't get in the fight, that would affect the world. And it's a red line to me. If we ever can't distribute that, or it's damaged or anything, if they bomb the wheat fields, that's a very serious current thing. Doesn't have to wait till 2070.
And what's sad about it, I'll come back to Sal, is that it's not just that Ukraine and parts of Russia supply such a high percentage of the grain to those countries in Africa. It's that grain is a very high percentage of the food that they have. It's not as though, well, we'll just eat more mangoes. They're dependent on grain. Sal?
I like the mango idea. Well, first of all, it seems to me, we obviously we all know we're a very divided tribal civilization. And we are living in several realities. always there are different realities. People have a different perspective about the whole world situation. A personal story, and I'd like you to tell it, Bob, is about our building our house, which was about 15, 16 years ago. So that's, not 30 years ago, when we should have been paying attention. But I think perhaps you were inspired, having been in the energy business, to be more conscious. And how do we get human beings to come together in some sort of consciousness that is good for the world? I mean, that's what churches are trying to figure out, and synagogues, and all kinds of wonderful organizations. Nobody's got the answer how to bring people together. However, just tell
Yeah,
us.
let me just describe that briefly. I think I may have mentioned parts of it here before. When we built our house on San Juan Drive, I was passionate about energy conservation. And the house was too big to really be a legitimate conservation place, but we had solar electricity. All the rooftops on all 3 of the buildings in the house were paneled with solar photoelectric generating panels. All of the water that went down the downspouts was trapped and moved to a 20,000-gallon cistern under the front driveway. The walls were between 8 and 12 inches thick, designed to, whatever the source of energy, it was going to be kept cool or warm, depending upon whatever you wanted, because the house was so tightly built and so organized from the standpoint of conservation. All of the subcontractors who worked on our house put a little green leaf on their business cards or on their logos to indicate that they were a green subcontractor. And our thinking, this was 2008, was, boy, oh boy, their thinking particularly, we're going to make a fortune because we're one of the few subcontractors who've actually installed this crap and done these things and so forth and so on. The green leaves disappeared within 2 years of finishing the house. Not a single house was built by our builder on a green basis again. And that's, as Science says, that's 15 years ago. What happened? Was it that environmental change was less important 5 years later or 10 years later? The fact is, it was more important. A greater necessity for greenhouses and green construction. It was interesting it didn't happen. Not a happy thing when you stop and think about it. And I don't know what can be done to, other than examples like that. Here's an example. We could show the power bill, how our power bill was so much lower because of photovoltaic power generation.
We sold power back to the grid.
Well, precisely.
I mean, it was a very fine example of a greenhouse.
But it didn't travel beyond that. Neil, and then behind Neil. Let's go to Neil first.
The fact of the matter is that climate change is nothing but an abstraction in the minds of most people. Well over 90%, it's simply an abstraction. How do you move from an abstraction to a real reality? One of the thoughts that might work is start at the point where trying to educate your children and your children's children to the alarming facts of climate change, because they're the ones that are going to be affected. How many of us have sat down with our children and discussed this at any length, trying to get them to understand the issues, trying to get them to change the school system, start teaching this? I would say somewhere between 0 and -2.
Yeah.
I certainly haven't done it, wished I had, but let's think about this differently than we have been. Go to the people with children and see if we can get them, the educational system, to be part of the solution.
That's a very good point. But before we go to Jeannie behind yourself, she wants something. One of the things that I've said at the time, this is 12 years ago, we're not going to make any difference to these subcontractors and builders. They'll build whatever the client asks them to build. And if the client wants the cheapest stick-built, poorly insulated house in the world, that's what they'll get. And therefore, the only solution is to get the government that grants building permits to require certain energy conservation measures. You cannot build a house without XYZ insulation, or you cannot build a roof without some photovoltaic generation. And there you get back into politics. And the governmental incentive to do that is just non-existent or not very strong. Jeannie?
Well, I think the answer to why your house was not duplicated was this word called payback period. And people who can afford those kind of houses are very, very conscious of payback period. And I think you're 100% correct that it will have to be required.
Yeah.
The other thought that I have is that there are many nuclear stations all over the world that are operating without any fear, without any faults. It has developed into, with certain sufficient safeguards, a fairly safe method of generating energy. We have this one disaster in our background, and that sort of has provided this coloration to anything that has the word nuclear in it, and we have to get past that.
The problem, right.
And I think if, while we're doing research, we can be doing research on even greater safeguards for nuclear plants than exist now, which seem to be fairly sufficient, but we can go even further and have overkill on safeguards.
Well, some would say that in the power business, the overkill has been so effective that it's not cost effective to generate power with nuclear, because we have to be so redundant in the things we do. I firmly believe it's still cost effective. It's still cheaper in the long run to do that. We had 3 Mile Island, then you've got Chernobyl, and then you've got the Japanese plant. I forget the name of the plant that was flooded. Those set back the course of nuclear development. Again, I go back to the private sector. We'll do what can make money, full stop, and we'll do a lot of it if it makes money. But if it's slow, highly regulated, or costs are required to make it not profitable, it's not going to happen unless there's governmental regulation. And that's hard to do. John? Sal? Or Ken? Do you want to?
John?
It's John, right?
No.
Bob, I'd like to step away from this subject for a minute. I have a concern about the legalization of marijuana through the country. And when we talk about the kids, they're the ones that are going to suffer down the line. But nothing much is being said. The state's a gold mine, and across the country, in Colorado, you see some effect out there. But for me, that is an eminent problem, and I think that's worth discussing.
I agree with that position. However, I wonder, is the right thing to do to go back to fully prohibiting it anywhere and everywhere, and thus having marijuana become what it has always been, an illicit drug that people nonetheless found a way to buy. I mean, one of the arguments for legalizing it is it's already being used. We're not able to tax it. Minor point. But more importantly, we can't regulate it. So, what's better, an unregulated illicit drug or a regulated drug that does harm? Do any of you have experience living in or have relatives in Colorado?
Or New Jersey, or many other.
I'm sorry?
Many other states have legalized recreational
New Jersey
marijuana.
just has.
Yeah, there are several states that have it. Our daughter, who you all met, she spoke here, is, if anything, very liberal, and liberal on a lot of things. She is adamantly opposed to the legalization of marijuana in Colorado. She says there are more bums that come to that state just to get high and hang out. It's interesting. And I don't know about Washington State. I think they've had a similar experience. But offsetting that experience is the tax revenue that comes from legalizing it. What would your recommendation be, John?
Well, I don't really have a recommendation. I think it's something that, at least it's a concern to me. It's not being discussed, and we are seeing around Jacksonville, for example, these little shops being set up. The
medical dispensaries.
Right. You look at that process in the state of Florida, and they went through and they issued licenses for people to grow marijuana and develop a source. Keep a close eye on that. How's that managed? Just all sorts of little bits and pieces there that are subject to being manipulated, and the whole picture to me is what I'm concerned about.
It'd be interesting to know if in 1932 or 33, when was prohibition abolished? 32, right? I mean, I would think of the level of drinking that goes on at Vickers Landing, we'd know to the month. When it was legalized. But my question really would be, was there similar discussion at the time about the evils of drinking? Ken?
New Jersey just legalized
Marijuana?
And there was something on TV about a place, I think it was in Bloomfield, New Jersey. But people were coming in and they had to answer the question, is it for recreational use or medicinal use? Well, 99% were going for recreational use and 1% were medicinal.
Out of curiosity, I don't know, I don't want to embarrass anybody, so I won't do show of hands, but how many of you know people here at Vickers who are taking medicinal marijuana for pain relief? Again, I'm asking you to admit that you know about it, so I won't ask. But I would have assumed, but I could be just dead wrong, that there is some, if not considerable use. It is, in fact, I don't know that it alleviates pain or just gets you stoned to the point you don't care. But, I mean, I say that as though I know something about being stoned to the point you don't care. I'm sadly, and I say this honestly, I somehow was in the wrong room when the cool people started to smoke dope. I just didn't experience it like my friends. But what do you do about, go ahead.
You still can.
I said, no, I got high this morning so I could come to this meeting.
How else could you come to this meeting?
But what can you do about something that is increasingly being legalized if people who are both legalizing and advocating for it are considering primarily the tax revenue and only secondarily the health impact?
I don't think that you're gonna get anywhere. We have not stopped cigarette smoking in this country because of a lack of interest in the public safety and health. So you think they're gonna do that for marijuana? No, they're gonna say, let them get high.
That's a fairly good point. John?
Nicotine being the most addictive drug in the world, period, above all of them. And even higher are menthol cigarettes. They're now
I'd like to ask Doug, how would you handle your drivers now if marijuana was no longer illegal, and you would have to tell your drivers you can't use it or you can use it, or how would you handle that?
I actually asked your daughter when she was here that question, and the answer she gave me was the answer I was looking for. Truckers have random drug tests for their drivers, and if a driver tests positive for marijuana, he is not eligible to drive. You can't have somebody operating a piece of machinery while they're high. It would be devastating from a legal standpoint. But anyway, so what you're doing is you're having, for someone that is a regular marijuana user, and I guess marijuana hangs around in your bloodstream for 30 days or something like that. There are a number of employment opportunities you would be excluded from primarily those reflecting the use of machinery or heavy equipment or something. In addition to that, there may be employers that are concerned about, does marijuana affect your judgment? And of course, that's in the whole other line of positions that you would disqualify someone from. So you're kind of down to, I'm not going to list them here, but you can figure out what jobs are left. And so marijuana is condemning people to really a poverty lifestyle as far as employment opportunities.
What about allowing drivers to drive when they've been drinking?
Good question.
I didn't hear you, Bob.
What about allowing drivers to drive when they've been drinking alcohol?
Oh, they're not allowed. They'd be fired. That's an easy one. That they would be fired.
I think that's right.
And then the union would essentially beg for their job back and so forth. And so the employer maybe on some basis will let them come back. But next time they're out of there, and the steward's not going to waste his time on it.
So it's essentially the same as drugs. Carol Lee, I'm sorry.
May I just say something off this topic? Just want to encourage everybody to come to hear Cindy Stevenson next week. She is our Republican representative to the legislature. And there are some things going on in Florida that I think we should all be aware of, particularly related to textbooks at the moment and other issues that are coming up since our governor is running for president. And I think she's our Republican representative and perhaps can tell us something about it. I don't want to put her on the spot, but she has been in the legislature. This is her second term, so I think she knows what's going on. And I would like to encourage everybody to bring your friends and relatives to hear her.
Yeah, that's next week, and I couldn't back that up any stronger. I think it'll be very interesting to have an elected representative here. Curious to know what she's doing, and also to look at all the various Don't Say Gay and math book prohibition and so on, to see where she comes out as a Republican.
I'm going to look up how she voted before.
Exactly. Thank you very much. Kurt, do you have something?
Well, back to the issue of pot. Our grandson owns 3 restaurants here, and was telling him about the difficulty in getting chefs for our kitchen because they have to pass a drug test. And I'm sure you all know that marijuana will stay in your body for 28 days. So if you have a random drug test and you smoked pot 27 days ago, you're going to lose your job. But our grandson Ted said, for heaven's sakes, he said, you could probably peel a potato much better if you've been smoking pot. And he said, if I had to do a drug test on my kitchens, I wouldn't have anyone in my kitchen.
Well, certain jobs are good on it. Somebody said to me that our community is more addicted to Tylenol, and that we could probably take a look. We could probably take a look at some of the medical marijuana solutions, because I think those are more regulated, or at least you can talk to your doctor about it. Because a lot of people are in pain. And
I don't think there
a
are
lot
very
of
many
people
people.
are, most people, we say people are pretending to be sick or hypochondriacs. It's not true. Most people are pretending hard to be well. So those that are in pain, I think, are buying, even in places like Publix, CBD oil, which doesn't have the getting high component, as I understand it. I forgot what that's called.
And I don't think it has much pain relief either. It's just
Yeah, well, I mean, I put it on my knee and it didn't work at all. I went back to Tylenol.
it's been an hour. My goodness. First of all, thank you very much, everybody, for coming. Thank you, Don and John and Carolee for suggesting topics. I think it was a really good conversation about the environment. We didn't solve any problems, but then just join the crowd. Nobody's solved that problem yet. But it's one that I think we'll come back to. It's just so important to let it go would be a mistake. And I'll be interesting to hear what happens. I haven't heard of any states rolling back legislation to legalize marijuana. It seems to me the damn tax revenue is such an incentive to states that are broke that anything they can do to raise a little bit of money, they're going to do. And it's so easy to say, well, those who are going to smoke are already smoking or are going to use, already using, so let's get some tax revenue. Doc?
Just say that, I think this is the case in Colorado, other states as well, the projected tax revenue has not been reached. The revenue has been less because they've raised the rates so high, and another byproduct of that is that the illicit drug business stays in business because they're untaxed.
Yeah, sure, that's a very good point. Well, we've solved 3 problems today, and that's, I think, enough. We have one more solution. Please.
Here we are at Vickers, doubling our population with Oak Ridge. Why aren't we putting windmills over there and solar panels on our roofs?
How about insulation in the walls?
And insulation in the walls?
And I want to be serious about that. There is insulation, but it's not energy efficient.
Place.
Yeah. Because whether it's Vickers, I mean, what are we doing for garbage collection here? Did we have that conversation before? Do we have a strong recycling program? No. It's just barely, if at all. Good for you. Thank you all.